Chapter 19. Academy Students.
My neck still hurts.
Parisia exclaimed.
Shh, it's not that bad.
Imelda replied. Ryuga's body, on the other hand, was completely healed from their encounter.
Ryuga's not complaining.
Imelda said with a grin as she continued walking.
He's got weird dragon healing powers.
Parisia nearly shouted. Not my fault if you're slower than a snail when it comes to recovery. Ryuga immediately paid for his treacherous comment as Parisia punched him in his arm 3 times. That almost hurt, Hairball. Ryuga rubbed his shoulder tenderly.
You've gotten pretty uppity in these past few days, stinky dragon.
Parisia said as she launched into more strikes. However, this time Ryuga dodged several of them with ease.
Okay, you two, relax. We're home.
Imelda ordered, prompting the two to look up from their impromptu sparring session. The trio had long since left the safety of the hut a few days ago and returned to Rindelin. After spending the night in the inn, they were finally on their way to the academy, or so Imelda said. All I see is people, Ryuga said.
People? You mean Nekoma.
Parisia corrected. Before them were hundreds of Nekoma. If Ryuga had to guess, they were master and student pairs as well. He couldn't help but notice the staggering amount of diversity in the crowd. Elves, dusk elves, Nekomata, kitsunes. As the trio strolled through the crowd, the clamor of hundreds of conversations filled the air. Ryuga's eyes bounced from sight to new sight. What are all these Nekoma doing here? Is it to go to the academy? Ryuga asked as he followed Imelda closely.
Some are. Others are here for the last chance to test their abilities. Every enrollment period, the academy holds 2 tests, one like yours, and this one to the public. So what's the difference?
Parisia asked.
Well, one major difference is the scholarship. Taking the test here requires paying an entry fee. In short, this test is mostly for people who couldn't have made it otherwise, but still want to try their luck. The second biggest difference is that the focus for people here is to become spirit guardians instead of Sen warriors.
Spirit guardians? Somehow that sounds cooler than Sen warrior, Ryuga commented.
Actually, spirit guardians are sort of like a law-keeping entity. They protect cities, enforce laws, and maintain barriers for settlements. Sen warriors actually get to leave settlements and explore the world if they choose.
When you put it that way. Ryuga and Parisia followed Imelda through a large crowd of people and eventually made their way to the city gate of Rindelin. Instead of the normal checkpoint, several of the cloaked examiners stood in waiting. As Imelda drew near, one of them broke off from the others and held up a hand. Proceeding beyond this point is for academy students. You'll have to turn back.
I'm an instructor, and these are my pupils.
Imelda cut the Dusk Elf man off. Present your soul crystals for inspection, he retorted, standing directly in her path.
Inspection? Why the changes this year?
Imelda raised a brow to the strange request. Who are you to question the methods of the great house Aharadi? You present your soul crystals, or fear na'an, let them pass. It took a moment for Ryuga to recognize the voice, but it was indeed the head examiner from his potential test, Dunzo. Head examiner? That's not... Silence! Allow them to pass, or you will be the one bringing shame to the house of Aharadi, Dunzo commanded, this time with more authority. The young Dusk Elf lowered his head, a menacing grimace filling his face as he motioned for the trio to pass.
Thank you, head examiner,
Imelda said with a bow, prompting Ryuga to do the same. Parisia just stared off into space until Imelda grabbed her by the back of the neck and forced her head down. After paying their respects to head examiner Dunzo, the trio then walked up to a Nekoma draped in a red ceremonial robe. Ryuga was immediately awestruck by this Nekoma's appearance. The skin was fair and pale. White lines of silver permeated through the Nekoma's skin, particularly around the eyes and mouth. Ryuga shot a glance at Parisia, expecting her to fulfill their customary ritual of explaining things. Instead, she just shrugged, appearing to be as clueless as he was. Hello, instructor. I trust this morning finds you well, the strange Nekoma said in greeting. Imelda nodded and bowed her head curtly.
Yes, thank you. These are my 2 students,
she said. The Nekama glanced over at both Parisia and Ryuga, inspecting each with his glossy silver pupils. For a moment, Ryuga felt as if the Nekama was staring quite hard, but eventually the Nekama nodded and took several steps backwards. He raised his hands, palms to the sky, then quickly dropped his arms. He did this several times, finally completing his spell with a twirl and a wrist flourish. Ryuga could feel the ground beneath them beginning to give way, and soon he felt the sensation of falling overcome him. His reflex was to grab someone, so he reached out to the closest person, being Parisia. Her claws dug into him as she clenched back, forcing him to instantly regret his decision.
Ah! We're dying! Ah!
Parisia shouted as she clenched Ryuga for all she was worth. Ryuga had pressed his eyes shut, but her screaming wasn't doing much to comfort him.
Stop being stupid. You're embarrassing me.
Imelda said sternly a few moments later. Both students opened their eyes to find they were standing in the middle of a courtyard with dozens of other Nekama around their age.
Oh.
Parisia chuckled nervously to herself as she finally released Ryuga. The sensation of the teleportation spell genuinely felt like falling from the sky. To Parisia, who was used to always landing on her feet, Ryuga imagined it must have been an extremely discomforting sensation. The two quickly trailed their teacher as they surveyed the surroundings. Many of the students were dressed in ornate cloaks and matching outfits. Ryuga suddenly felt underdressed for the occasion. After walking for a while, Imelda stopped before a Nekama that Ryuga assumed to be another instructor.
Ah, Instructor Sakura. I see you've brought students this year. Delightful.
Ryuga couldn't help but recoil after seeing the Nekama up close. His skin was a beautiful blue color, but his face, particularly his smile, was a bit unnerving at first. Rows of razor-sharp teeth lined his mouth, and his hands were a deep blue color, with rather large claws protruding from his fingertips.
Director Finley?
Imelda said as she bowed in respect. Finley must have noticed Ryuga wince as he turned his attention to the young man and walked over to him, grasping Ryuga's right hand with both of his.
Ah, don't be alarmed. It's a common reaction to meeting an aquatic. I'm really quite friendly, see?
Finley smiled broadly, which sent even more of a shiver down Ryuga's spine. Imelda simply smirked, realizing that Finley was purposefully trying to creep Ryuga out.
Nice to meet you, Instructor,
Ryuga said with a nervous smile.
But what are you? Are you perhaps a hybrid?
Finley then asked. A hybrid? Ryuga asked, a bit confused.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. I was just curious,
Finley said as he retracted his handshake and bowed his head slightly. It was a strange feeling to see such an ominous-looking creature blush. No offense taken, Ryuga awkwardly replied.
Anyway, Ryuga and Parisia, there are a few things I need to explain to you. First and foremost, this is where we part ways.
Imelda said. What? Why? Ryuga exclaimed, the panic obvious in his voice. Parisia, on the other hand, didn't say anything. She just looked down at the ground with her fists clenched.
It's just for a little while.
Finley chimed in with a nervous laugh.
Please stop smiling,
Ryuga thought as he glanced over at the instructor.
The first 3 weeks of academy life are all about assessing the strengths and weaknesses of students so that they can be trained properly. To do that, the students are trained for a short time with different instructors.
Huh?
Parisia's mood seemed to change. Her tail was now flitting back and forth. Imelda nodded with a smile.
Of course. It's important to do your best during this period of time. Now, as for you, Ryuga, there's one thing I'd like you to do.
Imelda drew closer as she whispered to Ryuga and Parisia.
Don't tell anyone about your ability to use multiple elements. Keep it a secret as long as you can.
Imelda's eyes seemed to fill with worry, though Ryuga couldn't initially place why she might be concerned with such a thing. Parisia nodded as if her teacher had given her a secret mission of sorts.
The second thing is to follow your instructor's directions as if they were me. Be respectful, no matter what happens.
Imelda seemed very firm on this point, so much so that Ryuga could sense a strong emphasis on this particular rule. They both nodded in agreement. With that, Imelda bowed deeply to her two students and turned to leave the courtyard. Both Ryuga and Parisia watched as she walked away, leaving them with Finley.
Now, you are free to socialize in this area until the proceedings begin. It shouldn't be too long. Congratulations on being accepted into the academy, pupils of Imelda.
Finley also bowed to them, and then went about his way to greet a new group of Nekoma who had just arrived. Ryuga glanced around the courtyard. All in all, there were maybe 200 students, most of which were clustered together and chatting amongst themselves. He sighed to himself as he thought,
This is basically high school again.
Parisia, on the other hand, gazed around with curiosity, her eyes flitting from face to face until she spotted another Nekomata.
Predictable,
Ryuga whispered to himself as he watched her head out. Ryuga decided to go find a corner all to himself and wait out his time. As he walked across the courtyard, he heard a snarky voice shout out,
Well, it's the walking potato sack.
Ryuga ignored it on principle, not really understanding that the comment was meant for him.
Yes, I'm talking to you.
A blonde-haired high elf teen shouted as he strutted up to Ryuga and grabbed his left shoulder.
Do I know you?
Ryuga asked, a bit puzzled as he glanced at the young high elf. Ryuga was sincerely drawing a blank until he took note of the young Nekomata girl that was standing sheepishly at the boy's side. Behind her were other academy students Ryuga presumed, all of them staring down their nose at him.
Oh, the rude kid.
Ryuga said in a sudden moment of recollection as he patted his open palm with a fist.
Rude? You're the rude one, you dirty street urchin.
The high elf said. His peanut gallery behind him chuckled and laughed, all except the young Nekomata whose gaze remained fixed on the ground.
Good one, Tierna!
A young girl shouted to the high elf.
What do you need? I'm bored, and you're not helping.
Ryuga replied nonchalantly.
Did you not hear what I said?
The teen continued, a broad smile on his face.
Yeah, potato sack, do you mind?
Ryuga said as he swatted the boy's hand off his shoulder, adding,
I wouldn't want your hands to get dirty.
The snobby high elf's face went flush with embarrassment and anger. As Ryuga turned to walk away, the Tierna flared his mana, coating his fist in Sen energy.
I'll teach you to disrespect me.
Tierna whispered as he lunged forward with a punch. Ryuga, having trained for the last 2 weeks straight to sense Sen attacks, easily sidestepped the attack. Unfortunately for the young high elf, his footing got tangled up with Ryuga's, sending him to the courtyard floor with a crash. Even Ryuga was forced to cringe at the impact of the fall.
Hey, are you okay?
Ryuga asked as he walked forward, extending a hand to help the Nekoma to his feet.
Don't touch me, you half-breed.
Tierna shouted. As a group of onlookers roared into laughter, the high elf's face grew a deep red color.
Young master, let me help.
The timid cat girl with pink hair stepped forward to help him off the ground and was greeted with a heavy backhand to the face, which lifted her off of her feet and sent her slamming into Ryuga.
Hey, what the hell is wrong with you, you little creep?
Ryuga shouted in anger as he caught the Nekomata girl, his arms hooking beneath hers as he attempted to hold her up.
Hey, are you okay?
Ryuga said as he shook the young girl several times. He noticed a trickle of blood from the corner of her mouth as she slowly roused in his arms. The high elf marched towards Ryuga and grabbed the Nekomata's arm, jerking her to her senses.
This is my slave, and I do as I damn well please,
Tierna said as he slapped her roughly several times more in an attempt to awaken her fully. What's more, she didn't make a sound or react, leading Ryuga to believe she'd grown accustomed to this sort of treatment. Ryuga could feel his blood beginning to boil and found himself reacting without a second thought. He grabbed the young lady and attempted to pull her away from the high elf master. The ensuing struggle caused both of them to tumble backwards with her landing on Ryuga's chest. For a moment, their eyes met. A deep blue color pulled Ryuga in. Though she had bruises on her face and cheeks, her beauty was undeniable. In that split instant, Ryuga was taken in. He instinctively reached out to touch her face, his eyes transfixed at what first appeared to be a bruise. As he looked more closely, however, Ryuga realized that it was some sort of faint symbol. He touched it just for a moment, as he could feel the sensation of Sen flowing from it. In that instant, both he and the Nekomata were engulfed in a glowing light. It grew so bright that for a moment neither of them could see, and when it settled down, the young girl's face was contorted in an unexpected expression. Her face was beet red, flustered as she pushed herself off of Ryuga and quickly got to her feet.
Master,
she began, but quickly fell silent. The high elf stood before them both, trying desperately to understand what just happened. His mouth was agape as he stepped towards the pink-haired cat girl, who in response took a step backwards as well. Ryuga, who had now gotten to his feet, made to dust off the dirt of his clothing as he felt a woman's embrace. The young cat girl wrapped her arm within his hand and pressed her bosom against his arm. Okay, Ryuga said, surprised and confused.
How did this happen?
Tierna